World War II. It was the good war. The opposing factions, Allied and Axis, were defined by the men who led. Men who have become archetypes of good and evil. These men defined the conflict, rallied their countrymen, demanded loyalty, and hungered for victory. But if the leaders defined the war, it was the regular citizens who fought to defend their country, ordinary men and women who rose to extraordinary heights in the midst of battle. But the memories of World War II were rapidly fading, along with the men and women who lived and fought during this momentous period. Through their stories, we must preserve the valor and courage of the soldier, sailor, marine, and airman who fought this good war. For they are the heroes of World War II. Admiral Chester Nimitz led the first major offensive in the Pacific. His objective was to drive the Japanese out of the Solomon Islands, where a large Japanese airfield was being built on the island of Guadalcanal. The Marines who landed on Guadalcanal on August 7, 1942, faced little resistance from the Japanese construction crews.
Most of Guadalcanal was occupied by construction workers who were finishing building what we called Henderson Field. There were Japanese troops there, but not a great number of them. They came later. They came in and made landings. But the original landing was unopposed.
It was over at the adjoining islands of Tulagi, Kavutu, Tanimbogo, where landing troops met Japanese resistance.
I was part of a gun crew, but my main job was to haul the ammunition. And those are long clover leaves, about that long, and they weigh a ton. We had to go from the Higgins boats when we made the landing on Gavutu, haul the ammunition ashore, and we were waiting in waist deep water, up to chest deep, and then go back and get more. And that's when the Japanese decided that we made very good targets. But we lucked out. Oh, I got ashore without being hit or anything.
I happened to be in a reserve battalion, so we didn't land till August 8th. They were parachutists, and they had a rough fight there, so we went there to replace them. Finally got in those boats, we got ashore. We didn't have any fire against us, which was lucky, but there was a dead body next to me that was from the day before. And that's the first time I saw what war was like.
After the initial landings, the Marines moved toward Henderson Field. A Japanese naval fleet arrived undetected and badly damaged the American ships that were supporting the landing operation. A ferocious Japanese air assault caused the American fleet to withdraw, leaving 10,000 American Marines isolated on Guadalcanal.
We had set up a perimeter around Henderson Field, and all we were interested in was maintaining the sanctity of the perimeter.
Japanese ships moved down the sea corridor formed by the chain of islands, which was called the Slot. These ships bombarded the Marines and landed troops on the island.
At that time, the Japanese controlled the sea lanes there. And they had two Japanese Congo-class 16-inch shell lobbing battleships there in that area. And they would come through at night and lob shells out, rake fire the field, because their idea was if they could knock out that airfield, we couldn't attack them as daylight came. But the sad part about all of it was when the shells from those Japanese battleships fall and they hit a bivouac area where there were people in tents, whatever, and they landed there, that was a sad thing. Because in the morning when you'd get up, you went and pick up those guys in pieces. I mean, a 16-inch shell is a murderous thing.
The Japs bombed it every night and tore up the runways, but it was the old steel planking, and we called it the Marsden matting. But the Navy Seabees were absolutely fantastic. Before dawn next morning, they will had the bulldozers and everything, and they would have the runway repaired.
The Japanese and Americans vied for control of the skies above and around Guadalcanal.
We would fly up the slot between the islands, Guadalcanal, New Georgia, and Florida, and Munda, coordinate our attack and hit aircraft that were parked on the ground, and barracks and installations, and the runways too. We were trying to knock it out because that's where they were staging from to come down to hit us. We used to drop the 2,000-pound bombs with the long nose fuse, which exploded right above the ground and just wiped out everything within hundreds and hundreds of feet. And we called them daisy cutters.
We used to go, when we went into reserve on the canal, we used to go down there by the beach and watch dog fights. The P-38s and the Grumman Wildcats fighting the Zeros. And when we'd knock out a Japanese Zero, it was just like a football game. We'd all yell and scream, and it was great.
But the American pilots weren't always victorious.
We took a beating on that score. We lost our command officer, Major Sailor, and a number of other good young pilots, and the Marine gunners that were co-chair with them. See, this is the thing about conflict and combat. We're all young. There's a certain amount of glamour to war. Despicable as it is, there's a glamour to war, believe me. And you really don't wake up until you see the ugly side of it.
And the ugly side of the war was experienced on the ground as well.
I was on patrol one time, and sniper shot one of my friends. This one wasn't even in a tree. He was in the bushes a little bit away. But I distinctly remember the American kid that got shot, and he got shot in the stomach. It didn't bleed at all. So we carried him back to base. They didn't even evacuate him because he bled inside and died that night. It was very sad because I was close to the guy.
The Americans received reinforcements and supplies. The Marines dug in on a ridge only 1 mile from Henderson Field. By October, the stage was set for the decisive battle for the island. From October 25th to October 28th, the Japanese launched a series of attacks. Torrential rains helped the Japanese while they bombarded the Marines. Bad weather grounded the American air fighters. The Japanese carried on the assaults night and day.
We had Zero coming in 24 hours a day, every hour. We used to call him Sewing Machine Charlie. We knew exactly who it was.
We would hear that washing machine Charlie guy, this Japanese that was in a Betty bomber coming over, and his plane always sounded like it was missing. You thought it would crash any moment. But he dropped a few bombs.
The Japanese came close to breaking the line, but the Marines and Army defenders held it together. This battle became known as Bloody Ridge. The Japanese lost almost 3,500 soldiers and were forced to retreat. In November, the Japanese tried another assault, but their troops were no match for the Americans. New American reinforcements arrived in December. By February, the remaining Japanese troops were withdrawn from the island. The Americans were in full control of Guadalcanal. The war in the Pacific presented new challenges to the Allied forces. Instead of invading a large landmass, as in Europe, the armed forces jumped from island to island throughout the Pacific. And it was the Navy who moved the men and equipment from one strategic island to the other. Naval aircraft carriers provided floating air bases from which to strike the Japanese-held Pacific islands. For many naval combat crews, the aircraft carrier was home.
First, we went to Nouméa, which is French Caledonia, and then we were ferried up to Fadi, which was in the New Hebrides, and there we joined our squadron. So that's when we first got aboard the Swanee, which was an escort carrier there.
Life aboard an aircraft carrier was a hive of activity.
It was like a little city without very many amenities. Now and then they might have a movie, and you could always go down and get a cup of coffee. And we read a lot when we were not flying. And on the days when the ship was replenished by an oil carrier or one of the supply ships, that's when we really relaxed.
The main activity aboard the carrier was preparation for battle. It would be from those carriers that bombing and strafing attacks of the Pacific Islands would originate. Fighters and bombers took off from the deck of the carrier and headed for their targets.
There are two ways to take off on a carrier. One's a catapult and one's a deck launch. The deck launch was more frightening than the catapult, because the catapult, even though you went from 0 to about over 100 knots in about 90 feet, you didn't worry about it because you had plenty of airspeed and you could pull up right away.
If the mission was successful, those fighters and bombers would strike those targets. When the mission was complete, the planes headed for the carrier in the safety of the deck. But landing a plane on the deck of an aircraft carrier was a nerve-wracking experience of its own.
Anybody that says that their knees don't shake while they're in that final approach is not telling the truth, because it is a frightening experience. But one most wonderful feeling is when you land and your hook grabs a wire and you stop.
Not all landings were perfect. The ground crew always was there to help with any casualties. As the war progressed, the aircraft carrier became a prized target for the Japanese Air Force to strike.
And the Japanese, they wanted two things. They wanted to get to the aircraft and they wanted the ships. If they could get to Navy, that was a big thorn in their side over there.
The Navy would take over Japanese airstrips after the island was taken. A new challenge for the ground troops arose: the jungle.
Well, our biggest problems was the jungle. It's the insects, the disease, the end of the world out there. The monsoons, just terrible conditions to be in. Our camp was always back away from the airfield, and it was a cleared place in the jungle, in the mud. And that was the way we lived. We lived in tents.
We had an old Quonset hut with just cots, with no partitions, all the way on both sides of it. We called it the Hotel de Gink. And the main thing I can remember are the big rats that used to come in there at night and run across the floor.
And they had a lot of lizards around there. They don't hurt you. But when you sleep at night, they're running over your body and everything. It's not too good a feeling.
Everything seemed to be adequate. It wasn't necessarily good. The food was definitely not good.
But through the horrific jungle conditions, these men carried on the fight. Pilots took off from makeshift airstrips, while ground crews prepared planes where they stood on the edge of the jungle.
We tried to keep the airplane as fine a shape as we could under the conditions. And we never seemed to have any problems. We got the job done. course, if you'd have seen us in the jungle, you know, I mean, you don't care how you dress or nothing over there, ain't nobody but you. I think we looked more like a bunch of bums than anything coming up through the islands, but we had a lot of pride in it. We had pride in what we did. We were the best.
Guadalcanal gave the American forces a much-needed toehold in the Pacific. The next mission was to strike the Japanese outposts in the Central Pacific. Admiral Nimitz targeted the clusters of islands named the Marshalls, the Carolines, and the Marianas. The objective? To penetrate the strategic barrier they created for the Japanese. If these islands could be taken, the U.S. could use them as stepping stones to their ultimate goal, Japan. The first step in this campaign was to take two islands in the Gilberts, Macon and Tarawa.
This was the first time we had gone up against a well-fortified position in an amphibious landing. Guadalcanal, which had preceded us, was a well-fortified island, but they didn't resist the landing.
The Navy initiated a pattern of attack on Tarawa that would be the template for future island invasions. First, the Navy would bombard the island with heavy shelling from their ships, hoping to eliminate Japanese heavy artillery. Then landing craft would ferry ground troops to the beaches. The ground troops would carry out the land assault. But on this first landing, things just didn't go exactly as planned. American shelling of the island did little damage to the Japanese big guns.
The shell fire hardly damaged anything on the island. It didn't put the big guns out of range. In fact, on the morning that we were going in, our ships had to go out another 5 miles to stay out of the range of the guns being fired from the island. So that delayed the landing.
But the landing did proceed.
There was a heavy machine gun firing at the amphibious tractors as they were coming in, which scared the drivers to a certain degree because they had no protection. These were not armored Amtraks. A bullet could go right through them just like opening a tin can.
An additional problem faced the Marines upon landing, the coral reef. The reef kept the landing craft 700 feet away from the beach. It also interfered with the landing doors of the boats.
I think we were probably the first boat to actually hit the reef and go in. And typically, if what would happen, the ramp would not go down, so all of the guys had to go up over the sides. And the gunnels of one of the LCVPs was about shoulder height. So when you got 60, 70, 80 pounds of gear on your back and everything else, it's kind of difficult to climb up over something and then drop in the water up to your chest. The Japanese had zeroed in on the edge of the reef. They knew where the boats would hit. So their guns are able to drop a shell right into the landing boat when it came up and dropped its ramp. And, you know, you'd see guys being exploded and blown all over the place.
The Higgins boats could not reach the shore because of the coral reef. So we had to wade in to shore. We had to walk in about 100 yards to shore under fire. As soon as I hit the beach, there was a wall up there. I dug my head in the sand, and I looked to my left, and there was a severed hand right next to my cheek.
We were lucky that we had the seawall there. If we didn't have the seawall, if it had been just graded beach, we'd have been in deep trouble. They'd have gotten everybody. But the wall wasn't high enough to protect them if there was a sniper out there. And there was one on the first day, and he shot a couple of guys walking down the beach.
And then we got the word to go over the top, and then we went in and started fighting. We had Marines with flamethrowers, and as the enemy would come out, the guy would stand at the mouth of it, of the bunker, and just cut them down with the BAR. They were heavily armed. They had machine guns and these big guns staggered along the coast there. And they said 1 million Marines could never take this island. So it was quite a battle.
The intensive fight for the island of Tarawa lasted 4 days. The cost was heavy on both sides.
You have to realize that the island was not much larger than Central Park in New York. And there were approximately 5,000 of the enemy ashore when we landed. And so in 76 hours, there were just about 6,000 dead and 2,000 wounded. Of the 6,000 dead, about 5,000 of those were Japanese. The battle for Tarawa was sort of a proving point for amphibious operations that later come in the Pacific. A lot was learned in that one. There were a lot of mistakes, but through mistakes you find out what went wrong and why. But Tarawa, because it was that first landing against a heavily fortified force, told a lot. It indicated that the amphibious tractors were an absolute necessity.
Another absolute necessity of war was the combat cameraman who captured the images of war.
A lot of the men asked me why I was up there when I didn't have to be, because they recognized that I wasn't carrying a rifle. I wasn't there to shoot somebody. And they say something like that, and I said, yes, I'm here to shoot pictures.
Up until 1945, the Pacific War dragged on with great loss of men and machines. But as the Allied forces moved toward Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the stakes became even higher. While the Allies were recapturing the Philippines, the strategic bombing of the home islands of Japan began in earnest. But in order to accomplish this mission efficiently and to ensure a safe air base for returning planes, the United States needed Iwo Jima, an island located just 760 miles from Tokyo. Experience had shown the Americans what a formidable foe the Japanese were. And the Americans knew the closer they got to Japan, the tougher the fight would become. So the United States began bombing Iwo Jima for 72 days prior to landing. Iwo Jima was hit with everything the Navy and air power could throw at them. But the Japanese had learned their lesson as well. They dug 11 miles of intricate tunnels. When the bombing stopped, the Japanese were ready for the American assault.
Things were hot and heavy at the time, and it was hot too. Hot with heat, hot with shells, hot with bombs, hot with fighting, and hot with everything. At a distance, you could hear the bombs exploding, the fighting going on. And as you get closer and closer, you really know that there's something happening in front of your ship. And when that lip goes down and you see the enemy before you, at a time like that, my dear, you don't think of segregation. One thought you have, two thoughts: saving your life and stopping this war. Doing whatever battle you have to win and end the battle.
The landing forces met with heavy Japanese fire. But those who did make it ashore were met with another obstacle.
The shelling and things on that beach, it was just horrendous. The Japanese had the upper hand on us as far as being able to observe everything on the beach. They were shooting from Mount Suribachi and from the cliffs in the northern end of the island. So it was just pure death on that beach, trying to struggle up that volcanic ash beach. It's, you could not hardly walk in, and you're marring up to your ankles in the volcanic ash. And it wasn't so much the death from direct bullets, it was from shelling and mortars that was raining down on us that was killing so many of our men on that beach that day. I don't know how anyone ever managed to survive that beach, but we did. Well, we fought across that small neck that first day, and the next day we turned and went up the west side of the island with the 4th Division taking the right side of the island. Well, we fought our way up towards the 1st airfield, losing many, many men being killed by mortar fire. Well, we approached the one side of the airport or landing strip, and there were many dug-in Japanese there that we encountered, and we were destroyed in one pillbox that on this particular moment, and my 4-man fire team took refuge in a trench. Well, I opened fire, all of us opened fire, the 4 of us opened fire against the Japanese. Well, I shot 2, the second one, my rifle jammed. Of all fate for the thing to jam. Well, when it jammed, I looked down at my rifle to try to unjam it, and I saw in the at front of the feet of my BA armor to my right, the grenades were right in front of him. Well, anyway, I jumped on the, threw my body on the grenades. The grenade I had in my right hand down underneath me did not explode because it would have blown my hand off. But the other grenade blew me over my back, blew my arm around behind me, and I'm laying on it, and I'm still conscious. It's just a miracle that happened. If I had been knocked out, then I would have drowned in my own blood because I was bleeding internally, and blood was coming out my nose and my mouth. Well, they left me for dead, and another outfit moving up saw me. A man looked at me and he called his corpsman to me, who medicated me, gave me plasma, and they took me behind the lines. In the process of taking me back, one of them fell that was carrying my upper part and dropped me and split the back of my head open on a rock.
As you know, there were 21 or 22,000 wounded. One company commander lost all but I think 7 or 8 of his men in the first 2 weeks.
Admiral Nimitz spoke of the men who fought on Iwo this way. Among the Americans who served on Iwo Island, uncommon valor was a common virtue. The next island on the way to Japan was Okinawa.
My main invasion of where I went in on the first wave was Okinawa. We had 80,000 Marines and soldiers that invaded Okinawa, which was the most ferocious battle of World War II. We were the first wave ashore, and this was a little scary. And we went in at Easter Sunday morning in 1945, and the interesting part, we were looking for a disastrous entrance into the island, but surprising enough, we lost no casualties on the beach, and we got a foothold on that land before we encountered the enemy. The early part of the island fighting was relatively calm, if there is such a thing as a calm war. By week 3, we were getting a little more involved in activities. Then the first thing you do when you encounter the enemy is you have casualties. And the mission there is to repair the casualties as best you can, as fast as you can, and get them back to the rear. The day of the actual action that I got the Medal of Honor for was just a routine day. We were securing a hill, and our platoon leader took a squad out to check out this hill, and we lost 8 or 10 that morning, and I'm working on some of them, and of course when the platoon leader got hit, then I had the opportunity of either going out after him or saying no, but this looked like it was workable, and as most of them did, and so I went out and I got into a shell hole with Jim Roach, who was the lieutenant that was wounded, and I was able to get some albumin going in his arm. Then I compressed him, and I just do the
the duties that you're trained to do, and they're routine. And then the Japanese, who were up above us, overlooking us, finally looked down and saw us. When they did that, then all hell broke loose. And they threw hand grenades down, and I threw my arm up, and I lost the right eye to a hand grenade, and I had a hand grenade in the stomach and one in the back, and so I was hit pretty hard. But after they hit me with the grenades, I had two choices. One was turn around and run, and if I did that, they'd kill me. I knew that. I said, I've got to face them one-on-one, and I'm smarter than they are, and I'm faster than they are, and I can outdo them. I grab his carbine, and I fire on him at every place I can. I grabbed a M1 after I got through with the carbine, and I went around the hill instead of going over it because it was too steep. I couldn't see very well, and I attacked him. And this whole procedure only took, minutes to very few minutes. And the M1, I could walk right up to him and fire. And when I looked around, and I'm the only person left standing on that ridge, I turned around and started working my way back.
The battle for Okinawa raged on for 3 months. The island was won at the cost of 131,000 Japanese and 25,000 Americans. As Americans prepared for the invasion of Japan, the reality of this mission became evident. Losses for the invasion would fall between 200,000 to 1,000,000 men, with the likelihood of the Navy being virtually destroyed by kamikaze attacks. At home, President Truman wanted to end the war as quickly as possible and with the least amount of casualties. The Manhattan Project had successfully tested the atomic bomb. Truman knew the destructive power of the bomb, but he also knew how many men would be lost in conventional warfare. Truman decided to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. But even with the devastation wrought by the bomb, the Japanese still did not surrender. Truman dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki. The Japanese knew they were defeated. The emperor finally agreed to an unconditional surrender.
I have received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan.
Aboard the USS Missouri, General MacArthur accepted the Japanese surrender.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always.
The war in the Pacific was over. Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor thrust America into war. The sides of the conflict became clear. The United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union formed the Allies, while Germany, Italy, and Japan formed the Axis powers. While creating a united Allied front to fight the Axis power was somewhat easy, devising a cohesive plan of attack was not. The situation in 1942 Europe was grave. It seemed that Hitler's army was invincible. Both Britain and Russia were in need of American military assistance. The United States wanted the conflict in Europe resolved quickly so it could fight the Japanese in the Pacific. A decision was needed immediately, and after much discussion between the Allied leaders, a plan was agreed upon. The Allies would launch a massive invasion of Europe through the beaches of France. Such a large undertaking needed a strong leader and strategist. The Allies found him in the person of an American general, Dwight Eisenhower. General Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Allied Commander of the invasion of France, codename Overlord. Eisenhower knew that he had a worthy adversary in the Nazi general Erwin Rommel. Thus, the attack must be quick, decisive, and secret. Normandy was chosen as the landing site. Its beaches were within range of fighter aircraft that would provide important air coverage for the landing troops, and the area was near major ports. American troops were landing in England by the shipload. There were so many American airplanes in the British Isles that some of the Americans referred to the islands as the world's largest aircraft carrier. By 1944, 1.5 million American troops had, quote, occupied England, unquote. As the troops arrived, the training for the largest land assault of the war began. The American troops were kept busy with bombing raids over Europe. Their missions over France were laying the groundwork for Overlord, but they became so frequent that some of the pilots didn't even know that they were taking part in the actual D-Day invasion.
We were training all the time. Overlord, of course, was not something we knew about when we first started. We were doing our missions.
Those bombing missions were just a glimpse of what was to be delivered on D-Day and beyond. Once on the shores of England, the paratroopers prepared for the landing.
The training continued basically the same as we had in the United States before we went overseas. For the benefit of the men and getting ready to go to combat, it's a matter of learning how to live in the field and become a part of nature. Get used to living in foxholes. Get used to eating rations that you'll be living on when you get in combat.
The Navy and Coast Guard also readied for the landings. While the troops trained and awaited assignments, Eisenhower and other Allied leaders, General Montgomery, British Admiral Ramsey, and British Air Chief Lee Mallory, honed the invasion plan. Three elements were vital in order to make the plan work: neutralize the German counterattack, synchronize the landing with tides and weather, and create a diversionary landing site. Knowing that the Allies would have to invade from the Atlantic, Hitler created his Atlantic Wall. General Rommel personally supervised the construction of the coastal defense along the northwestern coast of France. Millions of mines interwoven with emplacements bolstered the German defenses. Hitler knew that the Allies were going to make an invasion. The only problem, he didn't know when or where. The most probable choice, he figured, was the Pas-de-Calais, with France's closest accessible ports from England. Hitler concentrated his Atlantic defenses in this area. This move played into the Allies' plan. The Allies then created fake armies led by none other than General Patton. The Nazis were buying the ruse. Back in England, Eisenhower knew what he was about to ask of each and every soldier and sailor under his command. He visited his troops, taking the time to speak to as many men as possible. Churchill did the same.
Both of them, Ike and Churchill, were the type of individuals that you could relate to and that the men immediately respected and appreciated their coming to visit us.
Eisenhower had a difficult decision to make: when to attack. He chose June 5, 1944. Bad weather forced him to change the invasion by one day. June 6, 1944 would be D-Day in Normandy.